Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, well, we have so much to do, but the first thing that's going to happen is Joan and some helpers are going to hand out some cards and some pieces of paper. And I want to go over those with you. Now, if you've seen these 50 times or it's the first time you see it, you will learn something from these. So I'm going to go ahead and explain to you what is being handed out. And there's our card. Now, I think I've got the best card in the world. I love going places and being able to hand out my card because nobody else has a card that has the tree of liberty and the tree of bondage and tyranny on one side and a whole teaching opportunity on the other side. So people can actually, they keep these cards. We hand make those, folks. So when you see this, you'll understand a little bit more of why they're so valuable to us. But I want you to really see the message that's on them. Okay, so you have two trees. These are different paths of life. You know, some of you may have heard about there being a narrow path and a wide path. Okay, well, you're looking at the results of that. The live tree and the dead tree. And the way you use this is you show it to somebody and you tell them, well, you can have whichever fruit you want, but you can't have the fruit of liberty from the roots of bondage and tyranny. You see how that works? And because today people are not taught cause to effect. So if you don't understand cause to effect, when you go up to somebody and you say, you know, like let's say they're promoting socialism, and socialism is just a nice word for communism, and they're promoting that, and you say, well, what about the number of people that died under Pol Pot? What about the number of people that, you know, died under different tyrants around the world? Take your pick. And they look at you like they've never heard that before. It's because they've not been taught to look at where every idea takes you. So every idea has a destination. Every definition has a destination. Every idea has a consequence. And so when you are training a young child, you teach them to think about the consequences of their actions, the consequences of their ideas. And so this is a tool to give you to help you with that. On the other side of the card, you will see a diagram. First of all, it says liberty is indivisible. I want you to look on this side of the card, and you see a statement down here. And let's read that little statement together. If you can see it, what does it say? People who live in liberty think differently than people who live in bondage. Okay, so people who live in liberty think differently. People who live look here. People who live in liberty think differently than people who live in bondage and tyranny. People who live in liberty speak differently. And in order to think and speak differently, they must be educated differently. So today what we've done is we've sent our sweet little children to be educated under tyrants, to be educated to learn those things. And so, yes, I am a homeschool pioneer, a homeschool mom of 7. A lot of the things that happened, even for why we homeschool in Texas under the judicial branch of government instead of the legislative, goes back to the things that those of us that were the homeschool pioneers did way back at the beginning. Okay. So you have this is called our 3-column chart. And what's the left column labeled? What's it at the top? Old World Order. Okay, and then what's the column on the right labeled? New World Order. Oh, so do they come along and say we're going to turn your children into Marxists? We're going to teach your children to hate the United States and to hate liberty? No, they come along and use a method called the dialectic process. And this chart is a microcosm of how language is used to change culture. Hello? Okay. Okay, so basically what you have here is this process in the middle. So we're taking you from speaking is and not, you know, it is or it isn't, it's right or it's wrong, to, and that, what's the word at the bottom of that left column? Righteousness. There's a language of righteousness. There actually is a language of righteousness, and we have a whole young group of preachers today who do not understand there's a language of righteousness. They say that that's subjective. Okay, so you have in the, and then on the right column, what do we have? Hello? We're wired? Okay, we're wired. Okay, I'm on a leash here a little bit, but it's okay. We're gonna do this. Okay, so on the right column, what's the word at the bottom? Wickedness. Oh wow! So this is the language of wickedness. It's not just a choice. It's not just an idea, a different way of speaking, folks. It is the language of wickedness. And so I don't care where you hear that, whether there's a steeple on the building or there's an R after their name, if they're speaking the language on the right column, that's the language of wickedness. And that language is anything goes, whatever, you know, do whatever you want, but that whatever attitude. Okay, are you able to hear now through this mic? Yes. Wonderful. Okay, now, let's look in the middle column. The middle column is the transition column. That's the dialectic process. That's the redefinition of words. And what is the word at the bottom of that column? Fear. Oh, fear is the hook that gets you to say, I can't trust the Lord enough. I can't trust Yahweh enough. I can't trust truth enough. So I have to have another choice. And they move you and hook you through fear. Okay, those are yours to take. I hope you value them. We teach on these things every Wednesday night. We basically teach on law, government, history, economics, and education. When's the last time you've heard a sermon about those subjects? We are hardcore. We're leaders of leaders. It's like drinking from a fire hydrant when you first start. But we establish a vocabulary of liberty and a mental construct of liberty because people who live in liberty speak differently as well as think differently than people who live in bondage and tyranny. Okay, now, so I homeschooled all 7 of my children. I taught phonics in the morning, graduate level church and state at night. It was very good. My kids got, we were able to do things that, you just dream of being able to do with your children on almost no money, but with creativity and opportunity and training them to be obedient and to love education and to love learning and love life. Okay, so what we have now is, I'm having to do this also. Our projector went down, and so I would prefer you seeing the slides. It's much easier on you when you can see them. So I'm going to move forward, though, pretty quick. Basically, we're going to talk about where things are heading in the nation. And one of the things I want you to see is in any time you're teaching, there's 2 parts. There's, what you think of as the curriculum as far as the content, but there's also the methodology. So Christian schools have done a pretty good job as far as the content, but they have done a terrible job as far as the method, because your methods enforce or negate content. So what you have going on is, even if they have Bible content, or what we would call more freedom over liberty content, they still are using the Marxist methods of Benjamin Bloom. Now, some of you who are trained teachers, you would have studied Bloom, and I have a whole lot of material about Benjamin Bloom and why I believe what I do. I've written some professional articles on that subject, and it's something we often say when I'm introduced. You might not always agree with Dr. Marlene, but she will always make you think. Okay, so a lot of things that I'm going to lay out are different from maybe the frame that you're used to hearing, but you need to have some ideas that you can put together with other things going on in the nation. Now, one of my premises, and I actually teach if something's wrong in premise, it's wrong in result. Okay, so that's one of the things you want to teach your children. If you're taking notes here today, if it's wrong in premise, it's wrong in result. So if you look at something and you can discern what somebody's premise is, you can already tell whether it has a chance of success. A good premise doesn't guarantee success, but a bad premise does guarantee failure, okay? So what we have going on in our nation is even the people who are promoting more freedom other than liberty. So they're still not teaching the things that are going to lead to that in the long haul. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between freedom and liberty. I want you to think, and I know we sometimes use the words as having the same meaning, but freedom is more of a license word. Freedom is the license to do what's wrong, where liberty is the opportunity to do what's right. So on your card that you were given, that besides saying liberty is indivisible, it says liberty is the opportunity to make a choice to assume responsibility and accept what? All the consequences. I don't want to accept the consequences of my choices now, come on. But that's the difference of you assuming responsibility. With every duty comes a right, with every right becomes a responsibility. And so once you divorce those things and people think that they can have, that it's their right when it's not a right, you have had a decline of liberty on into tyranny. Okay, so I'm a lot about establishing vocabulary and establishing definition. So when you have established whatever you're talking about and you establish the definitions first. So we actually teach a method of how to establish biblical definitions, first of all letting the Bible define itself, and then we use the 1828 dictionary. Now I think there's some folks in this room that ought to at least have a shout out because you have one of those in your home, right? How many of you have an 1828 dictionary? I mean the big green, it's 3 inches thick, 8.5 by 11, weighs a ton, right? Right. Okay, now that dictionary gives a biblical definition of words, it has liberty built into it, and it tells you the etymology of the words and the reason that it actually teaches reasoning and logic, because Noah Webster took 28 years to write that thing, and he explains how he arrived at the definitions. And the dictionary was written to establish American liberty instead of British tyranny. Okay, so there's a lot. You read the introduction of those things, you'll find out a lot. So we actually teach people in our study groups how to look up the same word in the 1828 dictionary that gives the biblical definition of words. Then they use a 1970 collegiate dictionary, the one many of you would have been sent off to college with or would have had on your shelves for years. You know what dictionary I'm talking about? It says collegiate on the front of it, and it was very widely used. That gives a modern definition of words, and then there one in your computer or phone is the postmodern definition. So a postmodern definition means you're moving past the Bible and past the Constitution. Okay, do we want to move past the Constitution? That's what those con people want to do, is they think it's time to move past the Constitution. And I am so with you on the against the con issue. And I've been going around to some of my very, people you would know. I mean, some pretty famous supposed freedom teachers out there. And I've been going and meeting with them in person, and I've been giving them, in essence, their third notice to recant. So I've been talking to them over the years and saying, will you please reconsider your position on the con, which is what it really is a con, on Article 5. And if they say no, I basically tell them, well, you've made your choice. Okay, so that's a little bold, that's a little more than most people want to do, but it's time to see that as it's one of the dividing lines really between truth and liberty. I mean, truth and liberty and bondage and tyranny. Okay, now, I also want to talk about the idea that two of our distinctions at why liberty matters, and it took me 20 years to really get this nailed down. I mean, I taught it over the years, but it took me a while to really establish that I'd found what I was looking for. So I kind of tested the premise along the way. And those two distinctions, first of all, are individual self-government, and the second one is liberty of conscience. So you have all these freedom organizations out there talking about freedom, but they're not really teaching liberty of conscience or individual self-government. They're teaching people how to be dependent on their party, on the political party. They're teaching people how to be dependent on their organization instead of, kind of, here's the materials, go run with it, which is how you're set up. I mean, they provide things for you, but you don't have to go ask anybody's permission to go buy 100 new Americans and hand them out. You just go do it, buy 1,000. But anyway, the point is, most of those groups are still trying to keep everybody in a limited way of thinking. Okay, now, another thing I want to talk to you about is basically the condition of the culture is reflective of the church. So if the church is poor, lacking in teaching liberty, then the people reflect that. So I want you to know about a connection that basically this is what we teach. The gospel properly presented leads to liberty, and liberty properly taught makes one hungry for the gospel. So there's a connection there, but this new breed of, it's really the deconstructionist, for those of you who know what's going on in the evangelical world, it's kind of the deconstructionism that's going on there. They're hiding behind a quote-unquote reformed theology and using that as an excuse to not teach liberty. So they don't have an understanding of the connection between the true gospel and liberty. Because anywhere in the world, if this is how you tell with a missionary. In the mission field, when you see the people come into liberty, you know the gospel's been presented. And when they still maintain their old bad habits of their paganism, you know that it's been a religion that's been presented. It's a religious look, but it hasn't changed the hearts and minds of the people. So now we have in the States, we have a false gospel, a imitation gospel that is being portrayed as the real. And then this makes people who would otherwise love liberty and want it say, well, I don't want any part of that, because they don't understand what the true versus the imitation. Okay, now, that also gets into the difference between religion and the kingdom. And I'm sorry we don't have the slides right now because, the religion is more what man-made rules. So the way we're using that term is the idea of man-made rules, of a man-made hierarchy, where some people are closer to God than others. Some people do things right from others. But it sets up a religious, it operates under a religious spirit, and that very easily locks arms with a political spirit. So that's where the church is. There's all the politics in the church, and the only way you can go up in the church is to play the political game. I'm contrasting, and I'm going to go somewhere with this, but I have to lay some of these things out. I'm contrasting that with what we call the kingdom. And in the kingdom, it's not a physical kingdom. The kingdom is righteousness, peace, and joy in the Holy Ghost. The kingdom is within. It's not external. There's order, but it's not about setting up an earthly kingdom. In fact, the disciples got confused about this. They thought that Jesus was going to set up an earthly kingdom and they were going to be in his cabinet. You know, they're asking who's going to have the best job and who's going to be second, and tell us your pecking order here of your kingdom on earth. And they were devastated when he didn't set up a government that you can see, and instead the government is within. So it's within, you carry it within you. But people who are kingdom people and carry that within, they don't need a whole lot of external laws. In fact, one of my favorite quotes is it's from Robert Winthrop. And this is something you teach your children even with motions. Men, in a word, must be controlled, either by a power within them or a power without them, either by the word of God or the strong arm of man, either by the Bible or by the bayonet. Okay, so all these people that say, oh, we're not going to be controlled by anybody. Oh no, you'll be controlled by your own lust. You'll be controlled by the consequences of your own sin. You'll be controlled, men in a word will either be controlled by a power within or a power without. So what makes the difference is those who are controlled with the power within, internal to external, they have a different way of looking at the world, and they have a different need. I can leave my purse out on the table and not be worried that somebody's going to walk off with it, because you don't have that desire within you. And so as a culture, when we lose that character that restrains people by the love of Christ instead of by the camera on the corner, when that happens, then you have less need of civil controls, of police, of all of those things. You still have them because you have people who do not want to follow the rules. But part of that is, if we are going to basically establish or reestablish, refound is one of the words I've been using. If we're going to actually establish a nation that walks under liberty, there's a lot of things going on. We're at a very unstable time right now. Okay, there's many changes. There's many people vying for control of our finances, control of everything. If you control the finances and the food, right? Have you been noticing how much is going on about buying up the farmland, about controlling the farm, but controlling the processing of the food? Okay, that is not by accident. Okay, and I think you're an informed enough group to really get that. Okay, so those things are not by accident, and much of that you can't change. But you can control your own family. You can govern yourself. And when you have people who are self-governing, they still have an impact on the society that is absolutely uncanny sometimes. So do what you can do in your own realm. So this religious spirit that is operating in the hierarchical church, have you noticed that some of the big denominations are having some problems? Are having some problems? Some of the big denominations, right? Major denominations are falling apart. Okay, so some people are very disillusioned about that. Others go, oh, it's inevitable. But what I want you to see is you don't have to get all caught up in it to be already thinking about what am I going to do on the other side. So I'm really into more what's the long-term solution, and I'm also really working on what I'm calling the 40-year plan, but the idea of what happens. Let's say everything did fall apart. Let's say it can't be saved in its current form. What do we do from there? Everything you've learned about liberty is still the same. It's the principles of liberty are immutable. So they're still the same. So don't be, yes, it might be rough. Yes, there might be some issues. Like just because you have money in the bank doesn't mean it'll still be there. If you don't have money in the bank, you already know how to live like that. But the point is, that's not the issue. The issue has to do with what are we going to do to have the kingdom within ourselves, not to rule it over other people, but the kingdom within. So I want to talk a little bit about planning, because I find that Christians and conservatives, not necessarily the same, but are very reactionary, not good planners. I mean, as far as what's going on in the world. Most of the people that are out there making the plans for the future are people who are more, I would say, secularist. And so I want you to think about this. Now, what do the Chinese do? What do they do as far as planning? How long do they plan ahead? How long?
5 years. No, longer.
Oh, no. Real long. How long do the Chinese plan? 500, at least. Okay, they have a 500-year plan. Okay, so okay, so let me just, I really want to look at this. Okay, so what's going on currently has been over 100 years. You realize that the Fabian Society, those the author, the stained glass window we all know so well, the Fabians, Fabian Society. There's another word I'm trying to think of that's just not coming. Upton St. Clair, all those people, that was like 1906, I want to say. Okay, now that's over 100 years ago, right? That they got in a room and they made a decision about how they wanted the world to be. So that's been in the works over 100 years. Okay, so the Chinese have a 500-year plan, and socialists and communists, like Fabian Society, they have 100-year plans, and Christians and conservatives usually only react to the agendas of others or think about the next election. So we're very short-term in our thinking. Yeah, and I wish it were not so. I know people who are long-term planners, but that's who I hang out with. But I'm saying in the overall, it's not so much there that way. So I think that basically there's a lot of people praying for a third great awakening, and really praying that there will be an awakening that way. But a lot of people are making promises to turn things around, or saying that the next election is going to do everything. So instead of promising we will turn things around in the next election, it's time to have a 40-year master strategy that is realistic and does the hard work of building the character needed to establish the liberty desired. Now, I want to talk to you, 40 years is very short. But most cycles, if you read the Pendulum book or other cycle books, there's always a 40 years is one of the components. Okay, so even that is very short in the providential view of the history of the world. But I'm trying to get people to see that you invest in your children even for the fruit that you do not ever expect to enjoy. I actually reenact some it's called Patriotic Women in Early America. And a lot of the sacrifices that they made, they never got to live under, they never got to enjoy the fruit of. And so we have to have that long-term providential view of life that says what I'm investing in has longer value. And so what I want you to also think, many people can come up with a plan when they have lots of resources. But I want you to change the scenario a bit. What if you had to rebuild a nation out of nothing? I mean, literally, where it's gone. What do you carry within you that you could build with? Now, I'd like to say I don't understand the question, but I faced that in my own life. And I had to make some really hard decisions. And I had to figure out that if everything was taken from me, what would I have? Who am I? If there's nothing left but what I know within myself, what I know within the Word within myself, what could I use? What resources do I carry within to rebuild? Now that's a hard question, but it takes a lot of the threat away, because right now a lot of the Save the Country organizations are so holding on to what we have the way we have it. And much of it is gone, folks. I mean, I don't like saying that. I wish it were not so, but the character that it takes to build liberty has to be built from scratch. Even a lot of the, and I work with a lot of homeschoolers, and I'm speaking for some tonight if somebody wants to even tell anything about that. And I really believe that that's the core of where the character is going to be developed that's necessary for liberty. But basically what we have going on is you have to understand the principles of liberty that apply to every culture. They work in the jungle, they work in the city, they work anywhere in the world. And part of why I think God's let me speak internationally is so I really have tested out a lot of these principles of liberty. Because you have to take the Americana out of them and deal with the things that apply to everyone. And so things are changing in this nation. And instead of seeing it as a threat, you could see it as an opportunity to be there and have the knowledge of how to rebuild what's necessary. Okay, now, talk to me about how much time I have. I need to know that. My watch broke this morning, amongst other things. So,
You got another 20 minutes.
Okay, good. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to do some Q&A. So I want you to think about, some things you want to talk about. And I want to talk a little bit more about this refounding idea. Because what we have going on is everybody's so busy. It's just frenetic. There's this constant rushing and constant moving and this constant activity, but it's not producing the fruit it should. So a lot of what I'm challenging people to do is to measure what are the things that I do in my day that really have value. What are the things that I do in my day that have long-term impact? And that might be praying for somebody. That might be taking a young child and discipling them, having them come over even after school and teaching them the Word of God and teaching them the values and character that they're not learning amongst their family. So what we have going on a lot in the church has to do with the kind of the celebrity churches. And in my book, Declaration of Dependence, I get into the celebrity church and the celebrity culture. Now, I want to show you, I want to tell you, do a little bit of, how many of you have ever seen book TV? Ever seen book TV? You know what I'm talking about? Okay, book TV is where you get to see the author interviewed. And the author explains, well, the reason I wrote that book is, and I want you to understand this with what I have back there. Even some of you already have some of the books. So you don't need to buy them today, but you need to go home and look at them with new eyes. So basically, the flagship book is called Mountains of Deceit. Now, Mountains of Deceit deals with, the subheading is how the dialectic process has infected the culture. And it deals with how language is used to change culture. You read the first 19 pages like a regular book. And then it has compare and contrast charts. So you can even see from there, like you can see that it has 2 columns. It has the didactic, that's God's method of teaching, telling, explaining, telling you the truth, versus the dialectic, that is the doublespeak. So everything's being redefined constantly, and this is a manual that you go to. So after you read the first 19 pages and you read the general language that explains how the main things work, then you can go to education or law or government or entertainment, or there's even a little bit about the environment. You can go to these different places and see the language. And then what I want you to do is also start making your own charts, because there's new words being invented all the time. Do you see that? How they change the definitions? The word meant this yesterday, and now it means something else. Well, you have to come back to the point of saying, how do I understand that without falling into their language? Because the changing of the words is a test to see how far along you are on the paradigm shift to the New World Order. So if you won't use 58 pronouns or whatever, it's probably more than that today, but if you won't speak that way, then that you're showing that you're still over there in the Old World Order column, and they see themselves as more highly evolved and more highly understanding. In other words, they're so far advanced from us that we don't even need to be recognized. We're kind of like subhuman. Okay, so you want to see how this is done with the language, and then you can actually learn how to call them out for what is going on. But that's another step. Okay, so Mountains of Deceit, very important. If you only get one book today and you don't already have this, this is the book that you should get. Took 20 years to write, it cost $20. If you want to spend 20 years instead of $20, that's your choice. Okay, next, we have a little book that is written for people who don't read. Now, this is called 31 Plus Blatantly Ignored Causes of Poverty. It literally is such a big print. I'm sure you people in the front row at least could probably read it from there. Okay, but people who don't read need the data that's in here, and so it's designed that way. But I just had somebody who has a PhD and speaks 8 languages, and he heard me speak, and he said, you know, I've never read that book. I bet I can read that in 5 minutes. Well, it so affected him, he actually lost a job over it. But in a good way, okay, and the job needed to go. And it was like he saw the world, you know, so it's not, even if you read well, you can still read this book. And this is one of the main ones I do radio interviews on, because basically what's going on here is that it explains the attitudinal causes of poverty, and it also counters a lot of this culture war. Have you noticed there's a lot of culture war trying to pit one group against another? And so the answers to that are embedded in that book. Okay, so many of my books, they don't appear like what they appear to be and what's actually going on. You know, there's a little bit more going on. Okay, now, the 5 Pillars of Liberty is a course in liberty. And what it is it's a biblical worldview check sheet. So you can, first of all, read it for data about liberty. Many of you know the basic data, but it's also the format and the methodology of how this is put together to give you something that you can give to a grandchild, that you can give to the person that is just convinced that socialism is wonderful. So there's more to use. This is a great giveaway book, as is, we have people buy these, the 31 Plus, by the case and give them out. Ministries use this. Places that work with people who've been in prison, or battered women's shelters and places like that use that book also. Okay, now, there's also the Declaration of Dependence. Now, when we declared independence from England, We did not declare dependence from God. So, declaration of dependence is how to heal our nation through prayer. Now, we have people around the globe that use this book. It's very Americana. It's the most Americana cover. It's a custom done James Nesbitt cover, for those of you who know that level of art. He commissioned this book. And it has the Liberty Bell with the plumb line of liberty. And many times when I speak, I have a plumb line hung because I don't hang the plumb line. You know what I'm saying? God establishes the plumb line. And so this book is embedded in it is a course in logic, a course in thinking, a mental construct of liberty. And it explains how that works. And there's many controversial prayer directives, many controversial things that are dealt with in this book that you won't usually find in print. And then also, one more I want to tell you about, and that's the Thoughts on Forgiveness. And Thoughts on Forgiveness is a little coffee table book. It's for people who are hurting. You can open it up at any place and find, basically you'll find a thought on one side and an explanation after that. And it's just very simply done, but it brings a lot of healing and blessing in the way that it's set up. Okay, so I think that what we're supposed to do, I have a few more things I want to talk about, but I think that you may have some Q&A of some questions you want to make sure that I deal with. And then I want you to really remember that Wednesday nights, we have a global audience, and it's better if you tune in because then you get to ask in Q&A. So you get to participate with other liberty lovers from around the world. And then if you can't be on live, there is a way to get the recording. So, okay.
Misguiding the flock.
Well, I actually have a lot of material of webinars that deal with this. And basically what we've had going on, you remember we talked about that 100-year plan? The Fabian Socialist plan to get the ministers. The Frankfurt School, all of those people planned. The ministers were part of it. And when I went through seminary, I feel I was very protected in many ways, but they had some of those crazy interpretations of the Bible, and you had to just memorize this stuff. And I'm looking at it and I'm going, and how does this help me know the author? It was all philosophical, and what it really was is the dialectic process as applied to the Bible. So you have that higher criticism. Okay, so this was one of the main terms that it's called, is higher criticism. And it's couched in such a way to make you doubt. So let me teach you something here that's important. Many of you have already studied the dialectic process and know about it. But I want you to see that in the dialectic process, the next step, or a more advanced step, is called the negation of the negation. Okay? Now, how many of you at least heard that idea, right? The negation of the negation. Now, this is what's going on in the church. This is also like if you have the DARE program, you have any of this stop smoking, stop drugs, all of those things. Okay? Those are designed to make you more friendly with those vices. Okay, so you can study the Bible. What did I say early on? You can study the subject matter. So if we want to negate somebody's love of the Word and love of truth and love of liberty, then we put them in a class teaching them the Constitution, teaching them the Bible. We have all the best content you could ever have. But we use the method of the dialectic process. And look at your chart now. I want you to really get this. This is a wonderful, that he has done you a great favor. Okay, so look in the middle column. And what's that called at the top? What's the top word? It's the transition column. That's the dialectic process. Now we're going to transition you from loving the Word of God, from loving truth, and loving the Constitution, to basically you're not even going to know what happened to you because you went to seminary to study the Bible. Or have a, now we're going to start stepping on some toes, so put your toes underneath the table. Basically, how many, when this con stuff started up, how many Constitution classes sprung up all across the country? Did you notice? Where did they all come from? Were all those people really teaching Constitution? JBS has taught the Constitution for years, and they didn't change. They've been doing it. But look at all those groups that sprung up, all these constitutional experts all over the place. Where'd they come from? All these young people, all these children's groups even studying the Constitution. What were they really studying? Though most of those, and there were honest people, okay, there's honest brokers in there, but most of them were negation of the negation. They sprung up to give you confidence in those people so they can come right back around and promote con.
I get it.
Okay? Okay, you get it. Armando, we're talking truth here. Okay? So this is going on in the church. This is what's going on, and I'm going to name names, and you can never have me back again if that's not what you want to do. But I'm saying you look at Tim Keller and the Gospel Coalition, and you look at the things that those people are teaching. It is a reformed gospel. Look at the term deconstruction. And all these sweet, even some of our homeschool kids that, I think Josh Harris is a, toddler.
Right,
And, I kissed dating goodbye, and now he's kissed Jesus goodbye, it's just really, really sad. So you get your eyes open at another level of this negation of the negation, and that's where the trick is. And it's a magic trick. It's a sleight of mind instead of a sleight of hand. It's a sleight of mind, and they're taking away the minds of wonderful people. Okay, you wanted to say something.
So what part, building on his question, their congregation,
Okay, the goal was to silence the preachers.
Right.
So if you can't get them through popularity, celebrity, you can get the pocketbook. So the goal was to make pastors afraid of preaching the truth, that they would lose their 501c3s. Now, I taught church and state during, after the aftermath of this, when people started, not at that time, but when people started getting an awakening of, oh no, we've got to be quiet. And the secularists are very coy in that they let it sit a little while and make you think you're all right. Okay? It's like if a new law is passed. Now, let me jump into something else that's as controversial since we're already here. I don't think it can hurt. Okay, so I'm also opposed to vouchers in school choice. I am on, that's what I did my doctoral dissertation on, and that was very providential. I wasn't, smart enough to know where that was going in the future. That was really God's direction. And then now I do town hall debates and all about that subject, but I'm on the do not debate list of the major organizations that promote it. So if some little innocent meets me and says, oh, let's do a debate, when they call in to get approval from the head organization, that debate's not happening. But I have some very good literature on the subject and teaching if you want it. Okay, now why am I bringing this up? Because vouchers at first will look wonderful. For 5 years, they might be fabulous. Even though now we're starting to see in certain states, in some of the states that have passed them, they're not waiting the 5 years. With the homeschoolers in Michigan that are taking the education money, they're getting $1,900 per child to use the state's common Core compliant curriculum. Okay, now one of our friends is Israel Wayne. If you don't know who Israel Wayne is, look the man up. He's a homeschool dad at 10 and he's amazing. And Israel Wayne's written a lot of books and he speaks in the homeschool world. And he lives in Michigan, and he said when he heard that this $1,900 was coming out, he thought, oh, only the really people on the left will, take that. The most liberal homeschoolers might, but the rest of the leftists, won't. I try to use the term liberal as in classic liberal. I like it in that way more so the leftist. Okay. So I was with him about a year ago at a meeting, and he was scathed because about 3 days before that, he had talked to one of the leaders of his educational committee, like the state education people, about his county. And it turns out he was the only family in his county who refused the $1,900. Basically, they collapsed the homeschoolers through money. So this is the same pattern. Why am I telling you this? Because the same thing in many ways, it wasn't, the preachers through the Johnson Amendment were not given direct money, but they were given the illusion that they had to be quiet or they would lose the deductions and all of that. And it was really it was just a mist. It wasn't even true what it actually says in the requirements are very different from the perception of what people think it is. So back to the homeschoolers. Okay, so how do the homeschoolers protect their right to homeschool in most states? They have people that lobby for that, right? They have an organization, a statewide organization. How do they fund that statewide organization? Through a homeschool book fair. So they all go, and at the book fair, you meet other people. You find out you're not crazy, and these people do look somewhat normal, at the homeschool book fair. I can say that. I had a booth at the homeschool book fair for many, many years. So my point is, you learn things. You go to workshops. You meet other moms. It's fabulous. And you're in the process funding your support, your protection. Well, now there's no reason to go because you can't buy those at buy Common Core Compliant at the Christian Homeschool Book Fair. So you might as well just order it directly off the internet. And therefore, the funding to protect your future liberty has been wiped out in the process of giving you the money. Isn't that convenient?
Yeah, but my thing is about pastors of Econ. Well, we're not going to talk about I'm pastor. I'm not going to talk about.
Okay, so one of your talking points back to that is the difference between political and governmental. Okay, now political is partisan.
I'll mention that.
Okay, and this is a really important point. So even if they have a problem about the partisan side of it, which I can make a really good case in a longer time about, but the Bible is the first book of government. The Bible is a governmental book. Government, by definition, is direction, regulation, control, and restraint, right out of the 1828. It's also the flow of power and force, to quote Verna Hall of the Christian History of the Constitution. Okay, so if you deal with government, if you don't deal with government from the pulpit, you're not dealing with the Bible.
Good point.
Okay? And so also, if you don't deal with government, that means you're not talking about individual self-government. So you're ceding space and authority to the civil authorities in areas that it doesn't belong, because government is also, first of all, the individual. Second of all, the family. Two self-governing individuals are who form a home government, to form a family government, and then those self-governing people also form a church, and you don't need the state's permission to form a church. Okay? And then that leaves this little strip at the end, and I actually had the slide for it, but you didn't get to see it. That little strip at the end that's the civil government for when you don't fill up all the rest of the space. So fill your own space. That's a whole lot of the message today, is teach your children to fill their space. Teach your grandchildren to make something, do something. Don't be a consumer, be a producer. And we're doing a lot of work about producers versus plunderers and all of those things. Okay, I think you're time-wise. Okay, thank you. Apologies for the equipment, but I hope we still did a lot.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Marlene.
Yes.
Thank you very, very much.